Yeah, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining this worthy discussion. We are so happy that you took time out of your busy schedule to just have an opportunity to have a meaningful discussion about violence against youth. I am joined today by Tanaj Moody, and we are hoping that this will be informative and interactive. So please send us some chats if you have any questions. There will be an opportunity for you to ask questions, but you can chat along as we go along. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Dr. Renee Morrell. I am a retired FBI victim specialist. I have 40 years of public service, so I've been working a long time. My specialization is in human trafficking and mass casualty events. I have a master's degree in social work and a PhD in human services.
Hi, everybody. My name is Tanaj Moody. I am a survivor of domestic violence, and that's really what's got me into this work and doing this service. 7 years of working in victims of crime and 5 years of working with currently and formerly incarcerated people. I specialize in special education, prison education, and counseling and trauma-informed care. I also hold a master's degree in criminal justice, and I am also a licensed behavioral specialist. And so just to give you a little bit of background before we get into the presentation, I think it's important to also have an understanding around what is Light to Life. So Light to Life is a domestic violence prevention organization that I founded when I was in college in 2012. I started this as our first domestic violence organization at Wesley College in Delaware. And the mission for Light to Life is to educate, empower, and engage communities in a movement to prevent and end domestic violence. I've really used my survivor story and my story of strength as a catalyst to drive my passion to really give a space and a platform for people to be seen, heard, and understood. Because in most cases of people who are survivors or victors, right, it's very difficult to find a safe space and to feel like you belong somewhere and you're understood by other people. And so really Light to Life's purpose around that is to create that safe haven for people. And I've really, in addition to that, is I have a quote here, is like, I've turned my struggles into my motivators. So I truly believe that everything happens for a reason. And at the age of 16 of being in an abusive relationship, I didn't really know what abuse was. I didn't know what domestic violence was. I didn't know what that term even meant. And mainly because of me growing up in a neighborhood and an environment with my mom where that type of behavior was normalized. And so because of that, I didn't understand the current situation that I was really in. And I was able to finally find the strength and courage to leave this relationship going into college. And then, when I was attending Wesley College, I was still going through my own personal trauma and my own experiences of dealing with that. And I didn't really have a space to talk with anyone about this. So that's when I started seeking help on our college campus from our counselor. And I realized from that I know I'm not the only one who has experienced this, and I know there has to be other young people like myself who have experienced unhealthy or abusive relationships. And so that's what really motivated me to want to start Light to Life. And then in 2017, I founded the organization as an LLC. And so I partner with different universities, nonprofit organizations, the Department of Corrections, and facilitate these trauma-informed workshops around educating people on healthy and unhealthy relationships, really on that relationship spectrum. And also do speaking engagements and consulting around domestic violence prevention.
So our objective today is to expose violence against women, to really show the similarities between domestic violence and sex trafficking, to define what domestic minor sex trafficking is, and we will also talk about adult trafficking. But we will be concentrating, I think, mostly on sex trafficking, although there is labor trafficking, which is hidden and should get some due to. We want to highlight the importance of collaboration and partnership, and we want to provide suggestions on what we, all of us, can do to help.
You know, you're 12 years old and you're living with your moms, and your mom's is struggling because she didn't think that life was really going to work out like this for her, and she doesn't have a man around, and the men that are around haven't always been that great. Sexual abuse is becoming kind of normal for you, and you think that other people don't have secrets that are as bad as you, and maybe you've tried to talk to somebody at school and they haven't really heard you, or maybe they just haven't had time to listen to you. And so you're seeing these girls on the videos, and they're so pretty and they're so sexy, and so your way at 12 of escaping into this fantasy world is to think about what it must be like to be one of these girls, and you know that adult men already look at you, and you wonder how you can kind of use that.
I was just a child, and that's how I was supposed to live, like a child, like an adult.
So one day you're coming out of school, and there's a guy outside in a Cadillac, and he's nice looking. I mean, he's got the baseball cap and the jeans and the Timbs, and he tells you how pretty you are, and you know how pretty your hair looks, and it's been a while since anybody even really noticed anything about you. And for the first time, you feel like somebody's really interested in you, because now all of a sudden he's asking you about your dreams and your hopes and where your father's at. And he says that he can be a daddy to you.
The people that I shouldn't have depended on, I was depending on for support.
And so that night, he takes you to a club, and he puts you up on the stage, and he gives you a few drinks, and there's men throwing dollars at you, and it's scary, but all the time, you're just looking at his face in the back of the room, and he's like, you know, go ahead, baby girl, go ahead, you're doing it for daddy, and you're feeling proud because nobody's ever said that to you. And so then that night, he tells you that there's more stuff that you've got to do, and he takes you into a room, and there's a man there, and he tells you to strip, and you think this is something you'll never do. And yet, there's a part of you that already knew how to do this, because that's what your stepfather's been doing to you all these years before. And so you turn that trick, and it's like a part of you has died inside. And so you come out of the club that night, and you get in the car, and you know he's pumping 50 Cent, and he takes you to McDonald's, and he tells you, you did a good job tonight, sweetie. And he's stuffing his pockets with the $1,000 that you made. And right now, you're happy.
The people that I shouldn't have depended on, I was depending on for support.
And you feel like this is the best that it's ever going to get. And everything else in your life has prepared you for this moment. All the sexual abuse, or the neglect, or the drama, or the pain, or the trauma has prepared you for tonight, where you stepped across a line that you always thought you'd never really quite step across. And you don't realize that night what it will be like to be on the track and get raped. And you don't realize that daddy isn't really going to protect you. You don't realize what it's like to have a gun held to your head that night. You don't realize what it's going to be like when you catch your first STD. You don't realize what it's going to be like when you first come home and daddy beats you for the first time because you didn't make enough money. You don't know what it's going to be like to have cops offer to trade sex with you in exchange for not being arrested. And then sometimes you do that and they'll still lock you up anyway. You don't always like to sit up in jail and know that you just made $1,500 for your pimp last night, but he won't come down and put $200 bail on just to get you out a few days early. You don't know what it's like to walk down the street at 6 o'clock in the morning when you're just getting off work and people are starting their day and they see you and they know what you do and they look at you in a way that you just don't feel like you belong in that world anymore. And you don't know what it's like to feel like you've lost part of yourself along the way and to feel like you'll never leave. And no matter how many times you try to leave, he'll always find you and catch you. But that night, all you care about is the fact you're riding in a Cadillac and you eating McDonald's and you're listening to 50 and you got this one man who you really think loves you sitting right by your side.
Okay, Tanaj.
Yeah. So, I think it's important to mention here that, there's like this intersectionality between domestic violence and human trafficking. And that's really what we're going to be talking about today, that a lot of people don't see. And so I think before we even dive into that, it's important for people to really understand what is domestic violence, right? And what does that mean? And so what is domestic violence? Domestic violence is a pattern of behaviors used by one partner to maintain power and control over another partner in an intimate relationship, right? And so what is so important to remember about this is that domestic violence is about power and control. That's what domestic violence is about. And there's different forms of how a person can take over power and control away from their partner in the different forms of physical abuse, emotional and verbal abuse, sexual abuse, financial abuse, digital abuse, and stalking. And so I want us to really understand that there are these different forms that all show in different ways and don't necessarily have to happen in any kind of pattern or order. All of this can happen at once, or it could just have one main form of abuse that is occurring in the relationship, right? And so this isn't in order of anything of how this happens, or and I think, and also important to know is that, one form of abuse isn't worse than another, right? All of these have different effects on an individual and different impacts on how it affects someone physically and psychologically and emotionally. And so I want to make that clear, is just that domestic violence is not just about the physical side of things, right? Because when we see it in the media, or if we see it in movies, in the mainstream of media, we always look at domestic violence as someone getting hit, right? And we never look at what is this about? Like, why is this person hitting them? And it's really to take away this power and control over another person in these different forms.
Again, I want to kind of jump back a little bit and talk about the video. In the video, I want you to be clear that this young person was kind of attracted to this person because he noticed her and she was seeking a relationship. And that's often what I see when I'm working with victims of sex trafficking. And the definition of domestic monosex trafficking, and this is the federal definition, it does not require transportation, even though transportation is involved. It is basically the recruiting, the harboring. You can transport someone of US citizens or legal permanent residents. So this is really important because non-citizens can also be victimized. But for this case, for minors, you have to be under the age of 18 and you have to be involved in either prostitution, pornography, erotic dancing, or stripping. And those are the definition. However, for children who are not legal residents, you may also be trafficked for the purpose of labor or sex trafficking. And the difference between, and if you get nothing else, I want this to be clear, the difference between sex trafficking and prostitution is for minors under the age of 18. And this is with federal law in most states, but not all. Under the age of 18, if you are engaged in prostitution, then they will always see you as the victim, because children under the age of 18 cannot consent to a commercial sex act. They cannot trade sex for food, for money, for drugs, for living conditions, for clothing, to get their hair done, nails done, all of that. You can't trade sex because trading is the commercial aspect of it. And children can't trade. Anybody under the age of 18 can't legally engaged in a commercial act. They can't buy a car, they can't get a credit card, they cannot trade sex for anything. So after the age of 18, we are required, meaning law enforcement, or to charge it as a crime, we have to prove that that adult over the age of 18 was force, fraud, or coercion. Those are the three elements that we have to prove, that they were tricked into it, that they were forced into it, or somebody coerced them into it. So if we can prove those elements, then it is human trafficking of an adult. But for a child under the age of 18, they will almost always, at least in the federal system, be seen as a victim. So that's important when you're dealing with young people at all, to know that under the age of 18, they should not be charged. Now, some people, law enforcement didn't get the memo, but this is the case for federal standards. And I work with the FBI, and the FBI and Homeland Security are the two federal agencies that deal with human trafficking. So that's important to know. So we want to talk about the connection between domestic violence and sex trafficking. Now, sex trafficking appears to be something new and hot, and people are just starting to understand that this really exists in the US. However, sex trafficking has been around, or trafficking has been around a long time. The first policy was in 1910. It's called the Mann Act, in which it was forbidding to transport white girls from state to state for the purpose of prostitution or immoral acts. And that was in 1910. And what we know, and what we've come to know, is that there are so many co-occurring issues that are related, that are common denominators to both domestic violence and sex trafficking. And we wanted to go over a few of those. Secrecy, which is a big one. Mm-hmm. Now, both of these elements both secrecy is kind of hidden a situation for both. And the reason, because most of the victims feel self-blame. They fear that someone won't believe them, and they fear of involvement with Child Protective Services if they have children, and they fear that they may be harmed, hurt, killed if they disclose. So secrecy is a big thing. The violence is important. It is common in both areas. Both sex trafficking victims and domestic violence victims commonly report that they've been of broken bones, sexual violence, bruises, head injuries. So violence is common in both of these areas. Now, Tanaj touched on the power and the dominance of control, and that is clear in both of these. It's a wide variety of dominance, but the key variable is that someone has control and the victim feels powerless, and they feel like they have no choice. So that is what's common. There are rules. In domestic violence, it may be that you have to keep the house clean, the children have to be quiet. Most of the time, sometimes you don't even know the rules because they change all the time. In sex trafficking, you may have to have sex with all these people, whether you want to or not. You have to make a certain quota, so you have to bring the money in. You can't eat what you want, you can't sleep where so you're controlled by someone else. We know that there are psychological abuse and instability. Just not knowing what that day is going to look like or what you may do that may get this person agitated. So you're constantly living on eggshells, just wondering if you did something wrong or what would happen if you don't make your quota, or if someone talks to you too long, if you're out there on the tracks meaning if you're walking the streets and you're trying to get recruit Johns, and you're wondering what would happen if you don't make any money, or if you talk to someone too long, or if you look at someone too strange. So these things make it very difficult for the victim or the survivor even to know what is going to agitate that person who has control over them.
Dr. Morrell, I wanted to add to that too, because you made a great point about a person walking on eggshells, and the similarity between that with the domestic violence piece of that is this cycle of violence, right? There's like these three phases that an individual goes through, where you have your honeymoon phase, you have the calm phases in between, right? And then you have this like tension rising, and then you have this violence piece. And then all in between that, you can have these calm phases, right? And so that tension building, right, prior to or after the honeymoon phase, which is the butterflies, the unicorns, the good, happy feelings that you have when you're in a relationship. And when that tension is building, for instance, you have a partner that doesn't like you talking to other young men, and another man texts your phone, and automatically you have this like nervous feeling in your stomach. And back to what Dr. Morrell was saying, is that's like that eggshell feeling, like you feel like you're walking on eggshells. That's when that tension starts to rise in the relationship, and then that will then elicit to this violence response, whether it's physical, emotional, verbal, etc., from your partner.
Absolutely. Often, in order for it to even constitute domestic violence or for it to be sex trafficking, there's usually some element. The prerequisite is that it's relationship based. That means that the abuser and the victim, whether it's sexual or romantic, intimate, or even familiar, meaning someone in the family, can sometimes be the trafficker. So you have I've seen instances where a family member may be trafficking their child, a mother, in order to get rent money, or order to pay for drugs, or order for something to happen for them to get the money that they may need. So it's usually it's almost always relationship based. Definitely romance is generally involved. It is part of the grooming process usually. So with both domestic violence and sex trafficking, nobody approaches someone and is saying that I'm going to beat you or I'm going to make you, submit to these commands. It's usually a very skillful, and sometimes that person can be extremely charming. Everything isn't bad. You're with someone who does make you feel good sometimes. So that is, I think, the hardest thing to understand, is that most of the young victims that I've worked with, they feel connected, emotionally connected to this person, because they remember the times when it was good and the times when he was concerned about their dreams, asking them about what they wanted to do. So it's hard to tell when the lie began, or if it was a lie, or maybe it wasn't, or some elements of love that they believe is there. So that grooming period, that period when they are so involved in this relationship, makes it so much harder to get out. And if it is a family member, like a mother or an uncle or father, it is so much even more, because these are the people who you trust and believe that would take care of you. So it's a sense of betrayal in those elements, and can be very difficult to get out. Which really leads to the traumatic events. There are so many things that can make this traumatic, but mostly it's the repetition, the cumulative effect. It's not just one thing, it is a series of things usually that have happened that kind of start to wear down on the victim. Is usually, it can be verbal abuse, but after so long of hearing it, you start to believe it. You start to believe that no one would care about you, that even if you told the police that you were trafficking, because you've been involved in this life of prostitution, perhaps, that you feel the shame, or somebody's calling you out of your name, calling you a whore or something. So you start to take on that feeling. So the whole psychological and the traumatic events that happen, that are repetition and cumulative, they just build on one. It just tears a person down to the point that they feel like, this is as good as it gets. And they start to feel like this is all I can do. So that, to me, is the most devastating part. The part that it just tears down who you feel about how people feel about themselves. And that part is the hardest part, to kind of build the person back up, to give them that sense of worth. Financial control and sex trafficking, it is definitely about money. It's all about money. It's about this person who is bought and sold because of sex. And unlike drug trafficking or gun trafficking or anything else, where you have a product and once the buyer buys it, it's gone. For sex trafficking victims, they can be sold over and over and over again. That's what makes it so lucrative. Your product is never gone. And so that person can be selling sex 25 times a day. They can have 25 partners every day of the week for a year, for 2 years, for 3 years. Can you imagine the trauma that that young person or that person feels, but also the money that this trafficker is making from this person that they're just selling continuously and continuously. So it's a lot about money. And the financial control in domestic violence can be withholding money, or saying that, holding money against this person, or they're not even in control of their own money often if they work. So money is usually a common denominator. One of the big barriers to disclosing their victimization is, by far, it's about shame and blame. It can be such a big barrier, but not just the only one. They fear of the consequences, the retaliation, all of the things that, and just getting started again. Where do you go when you go to a shelter or to a place that you have to upheal your whole life? If you have children involved, so very hard to bring children into it. And some shelters won't even accept young men. Let's say if you had a child 15 and you're trying to get to a shelter, they may not be so warm about bringing in older children that you may have. So sometimes even shelters can be difficult and sometimes unsafe, depending on if you go into a homeless shelter or domestic violence shelter, you just don't feel comfortable. And so the barriers that victims suffer, just getting documentation together so that you can get your life back, it can be extremely hard. The consequences of victimization can be, what we hear victims talk about is that the long-term mental health issues that they suffer, a depression, PTSD, they dissociate, or they have times when they have to kind of have an out-of-body experience, substance abuse, suicide, self-harm, risk-taking. So some young people will even become more risky in their behavior. They have so many severe medical problems with head injuries, and because they've been physically abused, reproductive issues that may come after they've been abused for so long and had so much sex, that forced sex, rape, beaten. All of these things are so kind of common to both these groups. The challenges that you come with leaving or trying to escape is that you have to completely sometimes relocate. You have to find people who you can trust. When trust is a big issue, when this person that you trusted betrayed your trust. So just trusting in people, the economic instability. So if you have to relocate, sometimes you don't have a job where you're going, you don't have a connection with people yet. You may have to have legal action that you take, a protective order, or some order that you have against that person. You're trying to get child custody if you have children with this person. If it is a trafficking case, you are going to have a criminal investigation going on. So you have to talk to prosecutors and lawyers. There's a disruption in your whole social network. And I guess the biggest thing is fear of your life, which often comes with the challenge of escaping or leaving. So these issues can be overwhelming when you think about it, and how do you make the decision to leave? So it takes a lot of courage, and I tell every victim of every survivor of domestic violence or sex trafficking, I know that when they made that decision, that it took courage. It took so much courage for them to make the decision to change their lives, and more than most people have within them. So it takes a special person. When you really understand that that courage also signals to me that they have the strength within them. And with that, they can really, really excel. They just have to believe it. That one decision kind of signaled that this person has had so much courage. They have strength that they don't even know about. And if you can get them to understand that and believe that this was a big deal, and you deciding to do this means that you can get through it with some support. And I think that's the big thing. With some support, they already have it in their heart to do it. Because this decision to, in spite of everything that we've said, they still made the decision to do it. It requires so much. And then I think giving them credit and acknowledging that is a big thing.
And also, I think what I want to add to what Dr. Morell was saying too, just funny, like I think something funny fact to add into that, when Dr. Morell was referring to the strength that that happens, or not that happens, but a strength that a person has to find within themselves to be able to leave these unhealthy or abusive relationships. And even in these relationships when they're being trafficked, you know, part of the reason Light to Life's name came was from this song from Whitney Houston. I don't know if anyone's a fan here of Whitney Houston. I'm a big fan of Whitney Houston. There's a song called I Didn't Know My Own Strength. And Whitney says in the song, I didn't know my own strength. I found my light to life, my way out of the darkness. And that's how Light to Life got its name. So I just wanted to add that in there. But I think also adding on to the challenges of escaping and leaving, another thing that's occurring with domestic violence survivors and similar to trafficking victims is this trauma bonding. So there's a traumatic bonding that, you know, occurs as a result of this ongoing cycle of abuse, in which, you know, there's this intermittent of the reinforcement and of the reward. So whether or not this person's having these verbal affirmations, maybe that's that person's love language, and so they like to hear phrases like, I'm so proud of you, or like, you did really well, like hearing things that they normally wouldn't hear from other relationships. Like that's that positive reinforcement that of reward. And then also coupled with the punishment, right? So whether or not a trafficking victim didn't bring home the amount of money that was required of them, or a domestic violence survivor maybe didn't do dishes one night, or like I said before, my earlier example, had a text message from an individual that that partner didn't like, that's where that punishment creates this powerful emotional bond, really, that is really resistant to change at sometimes. And so it can occur through different periods of intense love and excitement with a person, and then it's followed by these periods of abuse, neglect, and mistreatment. And so this is one of the reasons why for a majority of victims of abuse are often described feeling more deeply bonded to their abuser. And also another contributing factor as to why they stay. And it actually takes domestic violence survivors around 7 to 12 times for them to leave, and then for them to actually make that decision. And so I think that's also important, is that like a person may be trying to leave 1 or 2 times, or even 7 to 12 times, until they actually are able to find that courage and that strength and the resources and the support system to be able to leave in a healthy way that isn't going to harm them or anyone else. And so going into that, it's important to also talk about the facts of the situation, and not only about the facts of the situation, but to really understand that domestic violence, there is no discrimination when it comes to domestic violence. It doesn't matter about your age, your race, your gender, your religion, your sexual orientation, your social economic status. It can happen to anyone, right? And so these facts here are really to kind of paint that picture, and to also show that this is a silent epidemic that happens universally across the globe. So on average, 24 people per minute are victims of rape, physical violence, or stalking by an intimate partner in the United States. Females ages 18 to 24, so you're looking at your college students, right, going into college, and 25 to 34 generally experience the highest rates of intimate partner violence. Now, mind you, these are only statistics of those who have actually reported, right? Because there are a number of individuals who have not reported for many of the reasons that we were discussing before, around the shame, right? Around the fear, right? And there's cultural reasons as well that go into that. So there's a lot of different contributing factors that may these statistics may be even higher, right? And so 1 in 4 women, around 24%, and 1 in 7 men, 13%, aged 18 and older in the United States have been a victim of severe physical violence by an intimate partner in their lifetime. And intimate partner violence, IPV, alone affects more than 12 million people each year. So to just give you a perspective on how universal domestic violence is, and the occurrence of that, it can happen with young people, right, starting at 18, and even younger than that, at even 12, right, where you have a different form of domestic violence that is happening digitally in this social media world. And so hoping that this gives an overall perspective and a general idea of the universal issue that domestic violence can happen to anyone at any age, and how often it is happening in the United States and globally.
And these are some of the sex trafficking facts that kind of paint a picture. It does not paint the true picture, but it gives you an estimate or some kind of ground rules for what we see. The National Human Trafficking Hotline received reports over close to 23,000 sex trafficking cases that were in the US. And that's important because most people in the US believe that this was an international thing, that, they've seen some of the sex trafficking movies like Taken on TV, and that was happening overseas. So you don't typically relate that trafficking, particularly sex trafficking, would occur in the United States with US citizens. In 2016, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC, estimated that 1 in 6 endangered runaways reported that they were likely sex trafficking victims. Huge, huge. Because when I was working with the FBI, we were targeting runaways because we know that they are vulnerable. We know that if a child has run away from home more than 4 times in their lifetime, they're probably involved in have been exploited or violated in some way. So that is important when you're thinking about your life and you have a chronic runaway. It does not mean that they are in trafficking, but it does mean that it is a risk factor that we need to pay attention to. It doesn't matter the reason for them running away, because there are many reasons. What really matters is that on the street alone, they're vulnerable. Globally, we know that labor trafficking and human trafficking, that there are about 4.5 million people who are involved or entrapped into sexual exploitation. That's worldwide. And the Urban Institute estimated that this crime, it averages for sex trafficking, they are due to get a revenue of $39.9 million in Denver. And Atlanta had about $290 million that people actually made from underground sex industry. So this is hugely lucrative. And why? Because there are people who are willing to buy sex, usually from children or those under the age of 18, because they generally, in my experience, the trafficker will spend more money, or the buyer will pay more money for children than for adults. It's a sickness that pedophiles have about having sex with children. So that becomes a particular an issue that we are looking at. And we do target a lot of times youth that have run away or who are involved in the child welfare system, because they are also particularly vulnerable.
My father abused me. I've lived in 4 different foster homes. I don't even know how many men I've been with. I've been doing this since I was 14. And I'm tired. I don't like this. Is this all I'm good for? Do you even care who I am?
Just relax.
Now, I think that video was particularly disturbing, but it kind of signals that anybody can be a buyer. And like I said before, this wouldn't be a problem if we didn't have people who were willing to buy, young people or youth. And anyway, it wouldn't be a problem, but you still have it. Another notable event in that video was that this young person said that she had been abused already. We find that to be common with trafficking victims. They have either witnessed a lot of domestic violence in their household, so they are used to seeing their mother probably being abused by someone, or by her lover, or by her boyfriend or her husband. So they already desensitized to the fact that this is normalized. Or that someone has abused them, which we find about 80% of the youth that I've been working with had some instances of sexual abuse, either attempted or confirmed. So all of these things set up the perfect storm for somebody to come in and exploit this young person. So all of that is really, really key in understanding who these young people are and what they have gone through in their lives. So it's particularly disturbing. But in this next slide, where as an FBI employee who worked in this for years, I can tell you what the flow is for us. And I think this is important because I want you to understand what happens. When we do an operation, which is usually an undercover operation, and there are teams out there, and this is the good news, that the FBI, Homeland Security, and a host of local your state officers and your local team is joined together. They call them joint task force to fight this crime. And so they come up with all types of things. They may get tips from the neighborhood. They may have very seldom self-reporting, but sometimes we have victims who self-report. But most of the time they will go in and do an undercover operation where they may answer the call of some young person who's advertising sex. But once we recover, and that's usually the special agent or the police officer, the investigative team. And in the federal agencies, you will have a victim specialist, which was my role, or a victim advocate. They're called different things at different places, but they may even use community advocates who are familiar with how to advocate for youth. And so this was my role. At that time of recovery, I would be called in. And as you know, that's usually about 2:00 in the morning. So let me tell you, this job is like 24 hours a day I am on call, but I would be called as soon as we would get a victim of trafficking. And in most counties, not all, but in most places, trafficking is considered an abuse for a minor under the age of 18, and it's considered child abuse. So you would have to call Child Protective Services, CPS. Which is a good and a bad thing. And I have to tell you, it's a good thing in some ways, because Child Protective Services has a system of vetting people in order to take a child into foster care. That foster care parent usually has to go through a thorough vetting process. They have the financial money to put the child in emergency shelter if we have to. The bad thing is that CPS, or Child Protective Services, the Child Welfare Service, is overwhelmed, and it's a broken system. A lot of the victims that we're dealing with already had some kind of introduction or had some history with Child Protective Services. So it can be good and it can be bad. I think the thing that you have to do if you're an advocate or if you want to join the cause is to have accountability for Child Protective Services. And so I felt like that was my role, to work with Child Protective Services and to hold them accountable. So whenever we recovered a young person in a trafficking situation, I would call Child Protective Services, but I was going with that child. I was going with that child to wherever they were going, because I'm telling that child, I'm going to be there for you until we find a safe place for you to go to sleep tonight. And tomorrow, we will talk about how we're going to get your life together or what you want. And so my goal was just to kind of give them a safe place to lay their head and for us to talk the next day. And that is something we can use Child Protective Services for. And so and I wasn't going to let that child just go with the CPS worker. I'm like, I want to meet where you go, and I want to see where they're going to be, because I'm going to come and see her or him in the morning, and I would have to be there in the morning. Another thing that requires when you have a structured system like CPS involved is that if you have a minor, that means you're going to have the parents come to the table. And so the next day, because you can't take people's kids and not inform their parents. So the next day, the judge has to come in. And if you had them in emergency shelter, you are required to bring their parents to the table. And that's an opportunity to see what's going on in the family. So you're going to see whether or not this family is incapable of keeping this child safe. You're going to be able to see if the parents are really good parents but lost control and they need support. So it's not all parents who have children involved in trafficking are bad parents. And I want to make that clear. Some way they just lost control, and perhaps they didn't know who to contact to get some help. So this is a perfect opportunity to get people involved that are going to try to keep this child safe. But that night, they're going to probably go to shelter. And so that is difficult. It's a difficult situation for the young person. But if they know And this is what I want them to know, what they can expect that night. Like, you're going to go to this place. This is going to be a safe place for you. And for some of them, they've never eaten, or they haven't had anything to eat, or all kinds of things. We're going to try to get them medical care if they need it. So you're looking to do an assessment of this young person to see what they need. So this is a good time, at least 24 hours of shelter, to kind of figure out who you have, because it's 2 o'clock in the morning and you don't know the whole story. So this is the settling period where you can try to get them rest, get them some food, get them medical care. And then the next day we try to put together what we may need to do, if we can. These are some of the challenges you have with this. The youth is uncooperative. I've never met one youth who said, "I'm a victim of trafficking, please help me." Most of the time, they don't realize that they are victims at all. They just believe that was my boyfriend. And they are so romantically involved, or sometimes loving this trafficker, that they're more concerned about him and whether or not he's going to get in trouble than their own selves. I've never met one, not domestic violence victim, that identified as a victim. Never met one in the whole time that I've been doing this. International victims will stand up and say, "I need help. Please help me. I've been taken away from my home." Domestic US citizens, I haven't met one that really identified as a victim, or who wanted to say, "I wanted help. Please help me. I've been held at gunpoint, or not even gunpoint. I've been held through this coercion. I thought he loved me." They can't recognize it. And so they don't even know what it is that that happened to them. All they know is that I was sold a dream. He told me that, he was going to take care of me, protect me, that we were going to live in this fantasy land. We was going to go to La La Land, and I was going to have the car and the house, and I was going to be able to get my hair done and nails done. And it seemed like, who wouldn't want that? Especially if he gave her a cell phone and he was giving her money to get her hair done in the beginning. And he was a little bit older, so it seemed attractive to her. And he said she was beautiful. And can you imagine if you came out of a child welfare system, or you were already involved in a home that was a little dysfunctional, very dysfunctional, and somebody is paying attention to you? So they are very uncooperative, and sometimes in the beginning, they may not provide you with accurate information. I've had victims who gave me somebody else's name, who gave me somebody else's date of birth, who just didn't give us accurate information. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, the system can't even give you the right information. The social worker doesn't have a computer at home. So it's like you're in the dark trying to figure out, what do you do? And if you have a child or youth that is coming from out of state, it's like, whose responsibility is it to pay? Because to put them in this emergency shelter, it's about $300 a night. For Child Protective Services is going to have to foot this bill, and they want to know, this is out of state. So this is not even our tax-paying dollars in the state that I'm in pay for this. And this is somebody who's coming from California or Texas or some other place. So we're going to have to put this child up. So money is a big issue for Child Protective Services, or for the system. And so let's not get it twisted. Money is a big factor on the kind of services and the kind of treatment that you get. The shelter issues. This, I believe, it can be big for domestic violence and for sex trafficking victims. It's just a lack of understanding by the staff for both DV and sex trafficking. You may have people who may volunteered for it and had some basic, especially early, some basic experience or some basic knowledge of it through, but do they really understand trafficking victims? And so often you have people who truly don't understand. I've had sex trafficking youth who get into arguments all day with the staff in these group homes and shelters because the staff really didn't know who they were and didn't know how to handle them. I have therapists who are ill-equipped to deal with this issue. They've never had a sex trafficking victim. They've had a somewhat mistreatment or maybe abuse, but they haven't had a sex trafficking case. So they don't even know how to deal with this youth. There are limited services for adolescent children. And that may be in DV and sex trafficking. So if you have a child who's involved in a domestic violence relationship, what do you do with her? Can you put her in a domestic violence shelter under the age of 18 or a 15-year-old? Can you put an adult? And then we have virtually no resources for transgender or male victims who claim to be sex trafficked victims or male victims. So that's a limited issue that we have to deal with. There are no long-term placement options often. For DV shelters, generally their grants or whatever, how their funding mechanism is, they can't take someone who doesn't meet that criteria for domestic violence. And often sex trafficking victims don't meet that very strict and rigid definition for a domestic violence shelter eligibility. So they can't usually transition to, we can't have a sex trafficking victim who can be eligible to go to a DV shelter. So there are no long-term placement options for them. And if we have a sex trafficking victim who is returned into the custody of their family, we have to question what was the reason that they ran away anyway. And it's always a funding issue. If we choose to keep them in out-of-home placement, round the clock, that means you have to provide for their health, for their food, for their education, for everything. And it can be very expensive to have out-of-home placement. So Child Protective Services is not in the business of, they are trying to get away from keeping children in placement, out-of-home placement, and their mantra is that they want to keep reunification or try to keep children at home. But they give little help to families and how to deal with a child who's already ran away from home. So it signals to me that this family needs help, not just the child that ran away, but often the entire family needs to help, and they need support, and they need to know, how do we keep the family, strengthen this family unit? So that piece is key that no one yet that I've known has really figured out how to address the holistic problem. And that's a big issue, a challenge, a real challenge. Oh, the victim. We talked about that. Some of the issues with the victim is that for sex trafficking victims, they are both the victim and the offender. Since trafficking is a crime, if they're over the 18, they can easily be seen as a prostitution. Or if you're 18, can you imagine? You're 18 years old, you're in a company with your girlfriend who's 17 years old. So she's a minor, you're an adult. Easily, if they get caught, the minor is going to be seen as a victim. The adult could be seen as the trafficker, even though they both are victimized. So it is very difficult to see the difference when you get in front of law enforcement. Age matters, even though it's the same exact situation. If they had prior law enforcement contact, I've already been involved with the FBI or local police. I don't trust FBI because who does in this age of defunding law enforcement and police brutality? It's really hard to trust this organization and social services. If they have time under the pimp, if they had a long time under it, it's so hard. They're so entrenched, such trauma bonding. It can be very difficult to get them out. They may have been exposed probably to drug and alcohol issues. So they may already have substance abuse issues, definitely psychological issues. They had previous sexual abuse that happened maybe in the family. And then you have this group of youth that what we call throwaways. These are the ones who would have run away, but nobody even cared. So they just kind of walked away. Nobody reported them missing. Their parents are so disconnected with them that nobody even cared where they are. And the fact that they have multiple interviews, if you're in the criminal, if this is a trafficking victim, you have the police, you have social services, you have forensic interviewers, you have prosecutors, you have all these different people, victim specialists. You had to have a physical, a SANE examination, or a sexual assault examination. All of these people are involved in your life in a situation that could be the most shameful time in your life. You've having to tell your story over and over again. Just that alone can trigger a lot of trauma. So that is some of the issues that victims have to go with. Just having to tell your story, having to go to court and have to tell it to a bunch of people. It's traumatic. And so all these issues we have when we're dealing with victims. So this is a scenario that I've had. This was my scenario. I had Kim, who is now 15. She ran away from home when she was 13. She's been living on the streets for 2 years. She strips at the local club in Baltimore, down on the block, and prostitutes. She has a 45-year-old man who assists her in the life. She believes that he looks out for her. He helps her when she needed help. And she says to us, "Where were you when I was abused by my mother's boyfriend? No one helped me then. I've been supporting myself for years. Why would you put me in a child welfare system that let me down?" And this child felt, and I remember her like it was yesterday, she felt like, I'm not asking for a handout. I'm taking care of myself. I don't ask you for anything. I don't need you for anything. So what would you say to her if she said that? What would you say to her if you met her? Would you say that it's going to be okay? That everything is going to be okay? You here now, we're going to save you? I wouldn't say that. What would you say to her?
And if people want, you can raise your hand in the chat, on your screen, and we can unmute you, or you can write something in the chat box too.
If you want to, because this is a difficult situation. This child has been making it for 2 years, but she's still a child. And so how do you help her? Someone raised their hand. Senor, she raised her hand.
I think someone's raising their hand.
How do we
okay.
let her speak?
Let's see. Here we go. Okay, I'm gonna.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, in terms of what I would say to her, I would say that I'm sorry about what happened to you and that you were completely innocent in all the sexual abuse that you endured, and that if you do need help, I am here. You can reach out. Maybe I give them a card or a couple hotlines, maybe offer them a plate of food or some healthy food or something, maybe try to pull them alone from the abuser as well.
You absolutely are on target. The first thing I would do would apologize. I would apologize. I would tell her she's absolutely right. We should have protected her, and we didn't. So that's a failing on society, that we let this child go live for 2 years, or that she was even living in an abusive relationship and CPS didn't protect her. Her mother didn't protect her. We as society didn't protect her. I can't promise her that the system, because we got to call CPS, is going to understand everything. But I can tell her that I can depend on me. And and now that I'm involved, I'm gonna see what we can do. So we're gonna try to figure out what we can do to help her. And that was a key for having FBI, those 3 letters in the CPS in her little town where she was from, really did help, because I went in hard. And it was just an accountability to CPS, saying that I'm watching you and we're gonna work together in trying to help this young person, because they don't know what to do often. So with federal resources, local resources, and state resources, and what we did was put a team together that became her support team. And so we gave her our number. She gave my cell phone number, which I give to all victims. It's my work phone number, but I'm on call 24 hours. So it's like, call me. And sometimes they test you. They just call you to find out if you're really going to answer. And so you got to answer. And so I would answer my phone call and talk to her. All the time I didn't have to go out. But sometimes it was just because she just needed someone to talk to. And then I would say, what's the plan? Okay, let's work with CPS and see what we can do. Let's get you, what do we need? We need to talk to your family. We need to see what the situation is. Can you go home? Is that suitable? If not, then what's the next move? And what do you want to do with your life? What if you could? What would you want to do? And just help her. Like, get your GED. Let's work on that. What's school like? What is it that was difficult for school? Can we work on that? Get your driver's license. Most young people, 15, really want their driver's license. So let's just try to figure out how we can, meet her on some of the things that she wants and some of the things that we know that she will need. But what I did was tell her at 13, this young person been on the street for 2 years. Oh, she got some skills. She got some survival skills that most people don't have at 13. The fact that she was still able to survive and she's still alive, it really is a testament to what she has in her heart and that she can make it, because she's already seen more than most 13-year-olds should have seen. Mm-hmm. So it's just about redirecting that energy that this one is a fighter and she can make it. So if with support, is what I have to convince her. Let's work together. It is still going to be on her. The hard part is going to be from her. But let's just open up some doors that will give her a fighting chance. Mm-hmm. And so we may have to be in her life for 5, 10 years. And that's the truth. This is not an easy thing. You have to stick in it. You have to get a couple of really good people. No one person can do it. And we'll talk about partnerships later. But this is one of the things that we said to her. And we were able to really keep her until she was 18. And then I tried to keep her longer than 18 for this victim, because she's a survivor, because I really wanted her to take advantage of some of the benefits of CPS, Child Protective Services, like paying for her education and doing some of those things and get her into transitional housing and independent living. But she had so much when she was finished that I felt real good about this young person. It wasn't easy, and we had to stick with her for years, but it was worth it because she's worth it.
Mm-hmm. And so for scenario 2, we have a domestic violence situation of a young person here. So you are having a sleepover with your friend, and she confides in you that she is stressed out about her relationship. She tells you how her boyfriend likes it when she sends him sexually explicit pictures of herself. So she has done it a couple of times. She didn't see any harm in it, but now he demands that she does it, even if she doesn't want to. She says that she tries to tell him she isn't comfortable doing it anymore, and he said since she did it before, she has to do it again. She also says that he tells her since she is his girlfriend, this is something that she is expected to do. Recently, he has told her that he will even leak the ones that she has already sent if she doesn't continue to send them. What do you say to her? And same thing, raise your hand and we can unmute you or write anything in the chat box. Someone has raised their hand, so I think we'll unmute.
Oh, hey. What I would say to her, I would tell her that it's not her fault. It's a really, really tough situation. I personally can't imagine what it would be like to be her personally. Since I haven't really been in a lot of relationships, I would just tell her to try to talk to her guidance counselor or try to contact the police, because if she's underage, then it's still child pornography. And if she can just talk to the cops in time, then he won't be able to send the pictures out.
Yes, thank you for that. And thank you for adding. And you were definitely on point as far as talking about them being underage. That's a very good point that you made as well. And I think we have some other people in the comments here too. Someone, Katie Rayburn, sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, saying, I'm sorry you're being put in this situation. Consent can be revoked at any time and the decision is yours. No means no, even if he is your boyfriend. Yes, yes. Even if you're in a relationship, consent is definitely still a thing that should be respected no matter what. And then someone else wrote in here, Lexi, they said, you get to decide what you do with your body, and what he's not doing is not okay. Yes. Thank you guys for adding that. And so, watching any friend, going through an abusive relationship can be really scary. And it can be really challenging and difficult to kind of figure out like how you can help them. And I think, everyone's comments and what people said were very much so on target. And in terms of confirming and reaffirming how your friend feels, right? And it's important to understand that this is a form of digital and sexual abuse. And you have the right to say no. It doesn't matter if they are your boyfriend or if you've been, or if they're a friend that you're just dating. It doesn't matter. You have a right to say no anytime you feel uncomfortable. And that includes sexting, because that's what this is. It's sexting. Pressuring you or guilting you into doing something that you're not comfortable with is never okay. And, no one ever deserves that. And so if you feel safe doing so, you can tell your partner that you're not comfortable with doing this and you're not comfortable with sexting. And, this is a conversation where you can then talk about boundaries, right? It's also important to understand, and I think someone alluded to this throughout when they commented, is that, there is a potential of someone being charged here with possession and or distribution of child pornography, right? So if anyone who's under the age of 18, um, that can be charged with possession of pornography and distribution of child pornography, like we were talking about before. The age definitely does make a difference. And then, if you think you would be safe in bringing this up to your partner, then you can remind them that even, that both of you can get into any kind of like legal trouble by doing this or engaging in this kind of sexting if you're under the age of 18. And I think like another tip here I would like to add is that, there are legal advocates in different nonprofit organizations that can help with these kinds of situations if someone does decide to leak any pictures or videos, right? And so what's important here is to mention is that I believe, people have the autonomy to make their own decisions, and you can never force a friend or someone you love to leave a relationship if they are not ready to leave. It's solely up to them, and that's their decision. And you want to give them that power to be able to make that decision on their own when they're ready. But a good thing to consider is if you feel as though it would be a safety issue if you did not send the picture. One recommendation is that if you feel as though you have to send it because of safety reasons, then do what is needed to protect your safety so that you are not being harmed or other people aren't being harmed. But if you do something that is to protect your autonomy, is really covering up anything that's self-identifying. So tattoos, beauty marks, anything where a person can say that that's you, right? As a tip, when it comes to your personal safety, and if you feel as though your safety would be in harm's way if you didn't send this picture. And then there are some comments in here too. Just want to make sure I get.
While we're doing that, I just wanted to say that that the production, the distribution, and the possession of child pornography is a federal offense. So that is a federal offense that the FBI would be interested in. So you would call your local FBI if you could get her or him, particularly in this case, the female, to come towards the SBI. The pornography itself is enough. Just the pictures would be enough, so she wouldn't have to do a lot. It would just be getting her to disclose that if she was ready to, or at least giving her the information. And I think that would be important, just to give the information to her that this is a crime, you don't have to do it. If she's under the age of 18, if they are over the age of 18 and somebody is forcing you to do this against your will, putting this out here, that can still be some legal issues if you don't want it put. Like pornography is not a crime, because you can get pornography, but you can't get child pornography. So, but if it's against your will, it can be a crime, a crime of digital rape, as someone has. Right. So there are legal recourses, and we can generally get some of that, we meaning FBI, taken down. However, once things go on the internet, people can save them, even though it goes away, or we can get that link taken down. If somebody has it in their computers, they could save it. They could they could share it with someone else if they saved it on their files. So it's the hardest thing to get is when you have this digital age that we are in, and how to overcome it. But it's, but with support, because I think that is common in this age, that I think awareness too, that, for us to be careful about how even with our loved ones, what we choose to do, because it's just scary these days if they don't. I think that's a lesson that we have to really even teach our young people about taking pictures, and even with someone that you are involved in. Do you really want to do that? Because what happens when you're no longer involved with them too, and they start sharing these things?
And I think Dr. Morel pretty answered that question too, when someone asked, what about the laws if they are over the age of 18? Some states right now are passing laws around what this is often called as revenge porn, right? And so many states are passing laws around that. And like Dr. Morel was saying, if this does happen, there are legal advocates that can help work through this with you to get those kinds of pictures and those videos taken down. And then another thing is, what Dr. Morel was saying is it's a good idea during this time, if this does happen to you or a friend, to then refer to your support system. So your trusted friends, your trusted families, a counselor or a therapist, someone to help work you through processing all of this, and how can you wrap your head around this, right? After this was someone that you loved and trusted, who then betrayed your trust. And so it can be a very stressful situation. And then lastly, I also highly, highly encourage to practice self-care, and just taking time for yourself and moments alone with yourself or with your friends or someone, where you are making time to just make yourself feel better. That's also very important. And someone else had a question in here, Dr. Morel, too. They said, what should she do if she feels uncomfortable or unsafe? Confronting her boyfriend about it, but doesn't trust law enforcement to handle it.
I would start with the victim advocates. There are groups, nonprofit, non-government agencies that you can go to and feel comfortable. They have no obligation to bring law enforcement in. If you're going to talk to a victim specialist, if you call up the FBI, ask particularly for the FBI victim specialist or Homeland Security victim specialist, and do a hypothetical. Say, I have this friend who you don't want to give names yet, because it's her duty to kind of give you and steer you as to what they can do, can or cannot do, and to talk through. Because I get that all the time. I even tell people, you don't have to tell me the name if you're not ready. But if you have a situation that you just want me to kind of brainstorm with you as to what some of the avenues that we can take, that's what they're there for. They don't have to really raise it to a point of an official investigation. direction. You just want to find out some information. What are some of the things that I could do? Is this legal? You know, what would it need to be legal? Maybe those are the questions that you want to ask. If you just want to get support, then even that victim advocate should be able to guide you into that direction. Whether it's just, I just need to get to a place where she can feel confident to stand up to her boyfriend. And that may just be about building her up to a point where she can even can even voice those concerns, which may lead to a lot of other things that she may be taking for granted that she's doing that she doesn't want to do. If she can't really feel comfortable enough to confront her boyfriend about that, then what else can she not confront him with? So it's about, you know, kind of helping empower her to just be the person that she is. And that is, you know, independent in thought, but still can be in a relationship, but it doesn't have to consume he can't be in control of her all the time. So it may be a good beginning if we could get her into some counseling, just so that she can start feeling comfortable about role playing. How do we talk? How can I say it? Because he may get upset. And what does that mean if he gets upset? Or, you know, just helping her to find self-worth so that she can really face and stand up for herself. So that may take time, but we certainly have time to give her. Oh, we have 5 minutes. Okay, I wanted to talk about this particular picture, and that was because we wanted to dismantle some of the myths that it's a victimless crime, whether it be sex trafficking or domestic violence. This hurts. It can be. This was an iron. This was one of a victim that I had, and it was a sex trafficking victim. And this person put an iron that you iron your clothes with to her skin because she would not cooperate. And so I'm saying this is that it's real. It can happen. We don't know. I know this person, but this could be anybody. She wasn't poor, uneducated. This could happen to anybody. So the myth that it just happens to those who are underserved, who can't afford it or just feel so bad. No, this was not that person. And it was a person who, you know, you would never think would be there, because we don't believe that anybody can be victimized. And I just wanted it to kind of feel that it could happen to anyone. It could happen to us. And so that was the purpose of kind of showing you this, to kind of tell you that this is not victimless and nobody deserves to be hurt, whether it's physical, emotional, financial, digital. Nobody deserves it. Collaboration is important. You can't do this alone, nor do you want to do it alone. It's exhausting, and you don't want to do it alone. You need to work with non-government organizations. These are nonprofits. You need to work with the state and local agencies, out-of-state agencies. You need to work with the family, the faith-based community. The victim needs to be involved in their own treatment. It is a collaboration of everybody needs to be on board, because it's going to take education system. It's going to take the health system, law enforcement. It's going to take victim advocates, the mental health profession. It takes all of those, legislation. It takes all of this. All of this has to be working if we're going to do it. So it's no one system that is the fault, but no one system can really handle this without another system coming in place. So relationships, build relationships with everybody so that you can say, let me call up and get some information. Let me call up this person. And that is when you really work it. When you can say, I have friends, or I know people, I don't know the answer, but I got some really good friends in the education department, or I know some really good nonprofit organizations who can maybe fund this for me, or I know this girl who works for the FBI who can tell me some legal stuff. That's when it works, when you have those relationships built. And that's our contact information.
Yes.
Take a screenshot or do what you need to do so that you can.
I have here, go ahead.
I'm finished.
Oh, okay. There's a lag on my end.
Okay.
So my contact information is on the bottom, and my website, lighttolife.org, if you're interested in learning more about Light to Life and the work that I do. My email's on the bottom of there as well, onemission1voice@gmail. And then I'm also on social media. So please pull out your phone phones and stay connected. And you can follow us on Instagram and on Facebook at One Mission, One Voice. So please make sure you follow us so we can all stay connected.
And I want to say, if you're interested in doing this work at the federal level, I know a lot of people wanted to know, what does it take to be an FBI victim specialist? Call me, email me, and I will tell you what the qualifications are and what education, what you can expect to earn, all those good things that you really want to know about. The background investigation, which is critical. All of those things I can talk to you about if you're really interested in being an FBI victim specialist. And we thank you so much for your time.
Thank you guys so much. Really appreciate everyone's time today. And I don't know if we have time for questions, but if we do, then,
You have any?
Yeah, if you have any, shoot some through.
Wow. I know someone wanted to know what I thought some of the gaps were in legislation. I think safe harbor, or those victims who got into a lot of illegal activities, maybe with drugs. So a lot of times you will get victims who were picked up on a drug charge, but actually it was a trafficking issue or shoplifting, or stealing something because she was forced to do so, or hungry because her trafficker wouldn't give her any food. So if it's some safe harbor laws that while she was involved in the trafficking situation, if they can get it vacated. So it's so many organizations that are working on that to kind of take away in some of those prostitution charges, because they have such a bad moral connotation. If you have been picked up and have a prostitution charge on your record, for the adults over the age of 18 who have that, employers look at that. They rather hire somebody who had a drug charge than to hire somebody who had a prostitution charge. It gives them a different perspective. So we want to have those charges vacated, taken, expunged from the record if we can, so that people won't see that, because it does mean a lot when you have that. So, if you want to talk about that off script, that's fine. Give me a call too.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you guys. I don't know. I think there's any more questions, but I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think so.
And I guess another thing to add on to this is, if anyone is interested in any virtual webinars being hosted within their organization or consulting work, please do not hesitate to reach out to me around domestic violence prevention. And I also just thanking It's On Us and Rape on Campus for providing this platform for us to be able to facilitate this conversation today as well. So thank you. And
did we have the handouts were available?
Yeah, so It's On Us and Rape on Campus will be also distributing via email to all of the attendees today handouts, and I know some people were requesting the videos that we were showing, so we'll be sending those videos and additional resources and handouts as a follow-up from this presentation.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you guys.
Be safe. Be safe out there.
Yes. Be safe.